Welcome to the deep dive. We're diving into the history of magic, witchcraft, and the occult, all that good stuff.
Really going deep.
We're basing this deep dive on A History of Magic, Witchcraft, and the Occult, great book by DK, which gives us a really awesome overview of, well, magic, basically, throughout history.
It's a pretty wild ride when you think about it.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Magic from those incredible cave paintings like at Lascaux to, like, modern Wicca. It's amazing how it's, I don't know, woven into like the story of who we are as humans.
Definitely.
So to kick things off, let's rewind all the way back to the beginning, to those early humans creating cave paintings. Do you think they saw what they were doing as like practicing magic?
It's a tough one. I mean, some scholars say those paintings weren't just art. They might have been a way to try to influence the world around them to get some power over the animals, maybe.
Like a good luck charm, but, you know, prehistoric style.
Exactly. It makes you think about how differently they saw the world, right? For them, everything had a spirit, even rocks and trees, like this concept of animism.
So to them, nature wasn't just like a background, it was alive, powerful.
Right. And then those spirits, they had to be respected, which is where those totems come in. You know, those special animals or spirits that tribes felt connected to.
It's true. And the art from that period, some of it's amazing. Like that lion man carving they found in Germany, part human, part lion. Talk about a head scratcher.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Like in their world, humans and animals weren't always so separate. Hybrid creatures, totally possible.
Makes sense, though. If you're living in a world full of spirits, you'd probably want someone who could, like, talk to them, navigate that world. That's where the shamans came in.
Right, the ritual specialists, the ones who could supposedly bridge that gap between our world and the spirit world. They go into trances, using drums, chanting, sometimes even, well, let's just say substances.
They were, like, exploring consciousness way before it was cool, venturing into those uncharted parts of the mind. Pretty brave, if you ask me.
Definitely. And they left their mark, too. That headdress made from antlers they found at Starkar. Amazing.
And that Siberian rock art, so detailed, like snapshots of their journeys. Just incredible. It's wild how some of those beliefs are still around today. But let's move on from shamans and spirits for a bit. We're going to ancient Mesopotamia next to the Babylonians and Assyrians. What always gets me is how similar they were to us, like magically speaking.
It's true. Amulets, spellbooks, curses. Sounds pretty familiar, huh?
Who hasn't been tempted to write a curse or two? No judgment here.
They even had their own how-to guides for dealing with witchcraft. These things called the Maklu tablets listed all kinds of spells and rituals to stop curses and bad luck. Talk about being prepared.
You know, that actually makes me think. Do you think they were, like, constantly worried about magical attacks?
Oh, definitely. And they had this whole concept of substitution in their magic. So say you were sick and you wanted to get rid of the illness, you could, like, transfer it onto something else, like a goat, and then, you know.
Out with the goat. Harsh, but I guess it makes sense in a way.
Shows how seriously they took magic, that's for sure. They truly believed it could change things.
Speaking of powerful magic, let's jump over to ancient Egypt, a civilization obsessed with death, but also, like, completely immersed in magic.
The Egyptians, they were all about that smooth journey to the afterlife. And their magic really reflects that whole Book of the Dead thing. It's basically a collection of spells to help you navigate the underworld, like a magical travel guide.
A travel guide? I don't know about smooth journey. Sounds kind of intense down there.
You're not wrong, but they had spells for everything, getting past dangerous gates, even turning into different creatures. And then there's Spell 98, which was all about keeping your heart from, well, betraying you during judgment.
And that's some serious magic. I guess it makes sense they had a god of magic, Thoth, right?
Thoth, god of wisdom, writing, and of course magic. They believed he knew everything about the universe, basically, like the ultimate magician.
What about the Eye of Horus? You know those amulets.
Those are connected to Thoth, too. Super powerful. Those were healing, protection, you name it. It's pretty amazing, actually, how a symbol like that can stick around for centuries.
From Egypt, we're going to ancient Greece, the land of philosophers, poets, and, you know, magicians. They had a whole bunch of gods and goddesses. Did that influence how they practiced magic?
For sure. A lot of Greek magic was about, like, appealing to the gods. They'd perform these rituals, make offerings, hoping to get on their good side, kind of like cosmic bargaining.
You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Divine addition, I like it.
Exactly. But they also believed words and symbols had power. Spells, amulets, curses, the whole 9 yards.
And what about those oracles? They were like the go-to for anyone who wanted to know the future, right?
Absolutely. People would travel for miles to consult them, especially the Pythia at Delphi. She was the priestess of Apollo. They say she'd breathe in these mysterious vapors and then speak for the god himself.
That's one way to get your message across. I wonder what those vapors were, though.
If only we knew. But yeah, those pronouncements were often pretty cryptic. Take King Croesus, for instance. He asked the oracle what would happen if he attacked the Persians. She told him he'd destroy a great empire.
That sounds pretty good, right?
Not so much. He went to war, got totally crushed, and lost his own empire. Turns out those prophecies could be a bit open to interpretation.
That tracks. But it's a good reminder that even if you have, like, divine guidance, things don't always go to plan. So we've talked about the Greeks and their oracles, but the Romans were a totally different story. They seem to have a, well, more complicated relationship with magic, wouldn't you say?
I think complicated is putting it mildly. The Romans, they loved their order, their laws, and magic. It freaked them out.
Yeah, they weren't messing around. They even outlawed it, right?
Absolutely. Their earliest laws, the 12 tablets, they forbade using magic to steal crops. Very practical. But later on, you have laws like the Lex Cornelia. That one was all about getting rid of harmful magic. Mass arrests, executions, the whole deal.
Talk about intense. And it wasn't just regular people getting caught up in this. Even the elites weren't safe. The philosopher Apuleius, he ended up on trial for supposedly using magic to seduce a rich widow.
He dodged a bullet on that one. But it just goes to show how seriously they took this stuff. To them, magic wasn't just some, like, harmless superstition. It was a threat, something that could disrupt the whole system.
It makes you think, what were they so afraid of? But speaking of fear, our next stop on this deep dive is going to take us to a time where fear really took center stage. We're leaving Rome behind and heading into a period of massive change. The rise of folk magic and the evolution of witchcraft.
This is where things get really interesting. From 400 to 1500 CE, as Christianity became more widespread, we see this fascinating blend of those ancient beliefs and new religious ideas.
It's like a cultural mashup. And of course, you've got magic in the mix, too.
Oh, for sure. And up north, you have the Norse, with their runes and their belief in sorceresses who could see the future. We even start seeing the legend of Baba Yaga emerge from Slavic folklore around this time.
Baba Yaga, the witch who flies around in a mortar and pestle. Now, that's my kind of magical being.
She's a force of nature, isn't she? A little bit terrifying, a little bit helpful. You never know what you're going to get.
That's what makes her so interesting. But while figures like Baba Yaga were captivating people's imaginations, the official stance on magic was starting to shift.
Totally. With the church gaining more power, high magic, the kind practiced by scholars, was basically labeled as demonic, super dangerous.
But what about everyday people? Did they just stop practicing magic altogether?
Not a chance. Folk magic, the magic of healing, protection, that kind of thing, that was still going strong. In fact, this is when we see the cunning folk come into play.
The healers, the midwives, they were like the wise men and women of their communities. They knew about herbs, how to set bones, maybe even whispered a few charms for good measure.
Exactly. And they were really good at blending those practices with their Christian beliefs. They'd call on the power of saints, work prayers into their spells. It shows you how adaptable magic can be.
It's like magic was this constant presence, but how people interacted with it was always changing, evolving. But as the church's influence grew, things started to take a darker turn. There was this growing idea that magic, especially the kind practiced by women, was connected to the devil.
And that's where we start to see the seeds of the witch hunts being planted. It's a dark period, fueled by fear and suspicion.
A reminder that even during times of great progress, things can still go very, very wrong.
You know, the Renaissance was a really interesting time for magic. It was like this weird mix of, like, fascination and fear.
Yeah, totally. It's like magic was stepping out of the shadows, right?
Yeah.
But then there was this dark side, too, with the witch hunts and everything.
Yeah, exactly. It's like this push and pull that makes this period so fascinating. So on the one hand, you have this rediscovery of all these ancient text stuff about magic and the occult, like the Corpus Hermeticum.
The what? Sorry, that name's a mouthful.
Yeah, it's a mouthful, for sure.
Yeah.
But basically, it's this collection of writings they attributed to this guy, Hermes Trismegistus. He was like this legendary figure supposed to have all this secret wisdom.
Okay, Hermes Trismegistus. That name sounds made up, like straight out of a fantasy novel.
Well, he's a bit of a mystery, that's for sure. Some people think he was a mix of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth. But those Hermetic texts, they talk about this really interesting idea that the universe is this magical place, everything connected, and humans, we have the potential to tap into that.
I can see why that would be appealing, especially back then after centuries of, church doctrine.
Oh, totally. And you see these ideas popping up everywhere, like with Giordano Bruno, this Italian philosopher. He was super into Hermeticism. Bruno, he believed in an infinite universe full of life and saw magic as a way to understand those cosmic forces. Pretty radical stuff.
But not exactly what the church wanted to hear, right?
Definitely not. Bruno ended up getting burned at the stake for his beliefs.
Wow. Talk about sticking to your guns. It's a reminder of how dangerous it could be to challenge the church back then, even during the Renaissance, which was supposed to be all about, open thinking.
Totally. It's tragic, really. But Bruno wasn't alone in exploring these kind of unorthodox ideas. Kabbalah, this mystical interpretation of Jewish texts, that was becoming popular during the Renaissance, too.
Kabbalah. I've heard of it, but I don't really know anything about it.
It's pretty complex,
Yeah.
but basically it offered this different way of looking at the divine, this framework for understanding the universe and humanity's place in it. And it had this magical side, too, with ways to connect with those divine forces.
Okay, so you have this resurgence of magic, both in this intellectual, philosophical way, but also with Kabbalah. But at the same time, you have the witch hunts going on. It's hard to wrap your head around, honestly.
It is. It's like this dark undercurrent running through the whole Renaissance. And it really comes to a head with the witch hunts reaching their peak.
And the Malleus Maleficarum, that witch hunting handbook.
Well, unfortunately, yeah. The Hammer of Witches, they called it, is
Yeah.
published in the late 1400s, and man, it spread like wildfire. And it's just awful, filled with these misogynistic ideas, accusations of making deals with the devil, and like graphic descriptions of torture.
It's disturbing that people actually believe that stuff.
It is, but it's important to remember the context, too. There was a lot of fear and uncertainty back then. Plagues, wars, social upheaval. It's like people were looking for someone to blame, and often that blame fell on those who were different, those who didn't fit in, those who practiced magic.
It's a good reminder that we're not so different today, are we?
Sadly, no. But amidst all this darkness and persecution, there were some glimmers of hope, too. Some people started to question what was happening, to speak out against the witch hunts.
Really? Like who?
Well, there was Johann Weyer, a German physician. He was one of the first to challenge the whole witches are in league with the devil thing. He said a lot of the accused were probably just sick, mentally ill.
He sounds like he was way ahead of his time.
He really was.
Yeah.
And then there's Reginald Scott, this English gentleman. He wrote a whole book debunking witchcraft called The Discovery of Witchcraft. He was like, look, a lot of this stuff is just tricks, illusions, nothing supernatural about it.
It's like he was trying to show people that things aren't always what they seem. Like kind of like those stage magicians, right? Creating illusions to make you question what's real.
Exactly. And speaking of illusions, even with all this skepticism and the witch hunts going on, magic was still captivating people's imaginations, especially in the arts.
Oh, totally. This was the time of Shakespeare, after all, and he
Right.
loved to use magic in his plays Macbeth, A Midsummer Night's Dream, The Tempest. The list goes on.
Shakespeare, he was a master at using magic to explore all those big questions about life, death, fate, free will.
And he wasn't the only one. There was Christopher Marlowe with Dr. Faustus, Edmund Spenser with The Fairy Queen. It was like this golden age for magical storytelling.
Absolutely. Magic provided this amazing language for exploring the unknown, and it wasn't just limited to literature and theater either. Music played a huge role, too.
You know, now that you mention it, music does have that power to transport you, to create these otherworldly atmospheres.
Exactly. Think about the music of that era, the soaring vocals, the intricate harmonies.
Yeah.
It's like it was trying to capture something divine, something beyond the reach of words.
And that connection between music and magic, it still exists today, whether it's a movie score sweeping you away or like a powerful drum beat that gets you moving. Music has this ability to tap into something primal, something magical within us.
It's a transcendence, isn't it? Connecting with something larger than ourselves.
Totally. But as we move from the Renaissance into the modern era, magic starts to take on some new forms, adapting to a world that's becoming increasingly obsessed with science and reason.
And that's where things get really interesting. We see the rise of stage magic, new spiritual movements, and eventually the emergence of Neopaganism and Wicca. But those are stories for another dive, wouldn't you say?
We're just getting started. Magic's story is far from over. We're back, ready to dive into the last part of Magic's story.
Definitely. And this is where things get really wild. I mean, we're talking about magic in the modern world.
It's like those two things shouldn't go together, but they totally do, right?
On the one hand, you've got science explaining more and more, but then it's like magic finds new ways to thrive.
It's like magic is kind of shape-shifting,
Yeah.
adapting to whatever's going on.
Totally. Speaking of which, one of the biggest things that happens in the modern era is the rise of stage magic. And I don't mean casting spells, but like real illusions, the kind that make you go, how did they do that?
Exactly. It's all about spectacle, pushing the boundaries of what seems possible. And no one did that better than John Eugene Robert Houdin.
Yeah, he was like a total rock star of the magic world back in the 1800s, transformed stage magic. I mean, we're talking elaborate sets, incredible automata, tricks that just blew people's minds.
He set the stage for, like, Houdini, right? The ultimate escape artist.
Oh, absolutely. Houdini took it to a whole other level.
Yeah.
Straitjackets, underwater escapes, even that whole milk can thing. I mean, come on, the guy was a legend.
Right. And people still debate how he did some of those stunts. It's like he really did the impossible.
He knew how to play up the mystery, that's for sure. But even though he always said it was skill, not the supernatural, you can't deny that sense of wonder he created. It was a different kind of magic.
For sure. So while Houdini was out there wowing audiences, another kind of magic was bubbling up more spiritual, more about exploring the inner world.
Right? Like those new spiritual movements. These groups were all about tapping into, like, hidden powers of the mind, using ancient traditions in modern ways.
Groups like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn.
Exactly. They were all about Kabbalah, alchemy, tarot, you name it. They thought those systems held the keys to, like, unlocking something deeper within a person. But they were also interested in using those powers for change in the world, not just personal stuff.
I can see how that would be appealing, but some of those groups could get pretty intense, right? Like Aleister Crowley, he was part of that world, wasn't he?
Oh yeah, Crowley. He was a trip. Definitely a controversial figure. He wanted to push boundaries, challenge everything, saw magic as this way to break free from, all the rules.
It sounds like my kind of guy. But on a more down-to-earth note, another movement was starting to take shape that brought magic back to nature. Neopaganism.
Ah yes, Neopaganism. And Wicca, of course.
Right. Wicca, this blend of ancient pagan beliefs, but with a modern twist. It's like they took those old ideas about nature worship and made them relevant for the 20th century.
Totally. And it really took off. Wicca is all about respecting nature, honoring the cycles of life and death, and this balance between masculine and feminine energy.
And it wasn't just about, like, rituals and spells. Wicca also became connected to those social justice movements, environmentalism, feminism, LGBTQ plus rights, things that were and are so important.
Absolutely. It was a way for people, especially women, to reclaim their power. And that brings us to magic in the 21st century. It's a wild mix of old and new, from chaos magic to tech witchcraft.
Tech witchcraft, is that what it sounds like?
Yeah. Think about it. Technology is like its own kind of magic, right? So tech witchcraft is all about combining those digital tools with more traditional magic practices.
It's like magic is always evolving, finding new ways to express itself. It makes you wonder, though, why are we still so drawn to magic? I mean, we live in a world where science can explain so much.
It's a good question. Maybe it's because deep down we still yearn for a bit of mystery, something that speaks to our imagination, something beyond the everyday. Magic reminds us that there's still so much we don't know.
And that's okay. It's about embracing that sense of wonder.
Exactly. Maybe the real magic was inside us all along.
Ooh, I like that. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the history of magic, I think the biggest takeaway is that magic is more than just spells and potions. It's a reflection of who we are, our hopes, fears, and this desire to connect with something bigger than ourselves. From those ancient cave paintings to those tech witches coding spells on their laptops, magic has been a constant throughout human history. It's a reminder that we're all part of this vast, interconnected web of existence. And maybe, just maybe, there's a little bit of magic in all of us. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of magic, witchcraft, and the occult. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the magic alive.